And welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. Kent Myers, my usual co-host, has the week off. Well, as those regular viewers will know, we meet interesting guests and discuss topical issues each week here on The Verdict, and that's certainly the case this week. We will be discussing the issue of global warming. Our guest is Dr. David Karoly. He's a professor of meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. Global warming, the topic this morning on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
Every day America uses clean-burning natural gas instead of coal or oil is a day of victory for our environment. That's why Chesapeake chose to explore for natural gas exclusively, and we've never looked back. Because natural gas burns twice as clean as oil or coal, and reducing carbon emissions to combat potential global warming is every bit as urgent as cutting our dependence on energy imports. As America's #1 driller of new gas wells, Chesapeake is moving fast to find untapped reserves of natural gas here at home. It's the right fuel for America's economy and the fuel for a clean air future. We just happen to be early to see it so clearly. Chesapeake, natural gas wins the day.
State championships are on the line, and the road to the finals runs right through the Built Ford Tough Tournament connection.
Well, you're a senior. Are you going to play or not?
That's right. It doesn't get any bigger than this. 3 nights a week, 3 weeks in a row, wall-to-wall basketball. Highlights, scores, interviews, and expert analysis.
They grew up living it, dreaming it, and now they're living it.
The Built Ford Tough Tournament connection returns to the Cox Channel in February. It's nothing but net.
Hi, honey. You've got to check this out.
What? What are we listening to?
I had digital phone service installed today.
It sounds just like before.
I know, but it's going to save us a ton of money.
With Cox Digital Telephone, you'll save big every month. Keep your same phone number and get your favorite calling features. Just pay less.
That does sound good.
You should hear the upstairs phone.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Good to have you. Mick Cornett with my guest, David Karoly. Let me introduce David to you, as he is an expert on the subject that we are talking about today. He is the Williams Chair Professor of Meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. He joined the School of Meteorology faculty in January 2003, where he was at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. He was review editor of the chapter Understanding and Attributing Climate Change in the work Climate Change 2007, The Physical Science Basis. In 1993, he received the Meisinger Award from the American Meteorological Society, and in 1999 he was elected a Fellow of the American Meteorological Society for outstanding contributions to the atmospheric sciences. David, welcome to The Verdict.
Thank you very much.
That's
it's
a
great.
mouthful, just that word meteorological.
Yeah, I get to say it a lot. Sometimes we just shorten it a bit, but yeah, meteorological is hard to wrap your tongue around.
A lot of people are aware of OU's fine meteorology school. What do you do at the School of Meteorology?
I'm a professor of meteorology. Usually I'm teaching meteorology classes or classes on climate variability and climate change. I also do research on climate change and global warming, and that's one of the reasons I'm here today, I guess.
There's a lot of debate about the global changes that may be taking place in the world of meteorology, and specifically about whether or not the Earth is cooling or warming. And this is certainly not a new subject, but it seems to be getting more and more of interest, and the media certainly is asking more and more questions about it. Tell us in general your take here in early 2007 about global warming and whether or not it's an issue that we should be concerned with.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's not just my take, but let me just tell you a little bit about what evidence there is for global warming. I mean, there have been many, many studies that show that yes, the Earth has cooled and warmed over the past, over millions of years and over the last 100,000 years. But there's now convincing evidence that the Earth is climbing, the Earth is warming, the temperatures are climbing, and it's not just around Oklahoma or the United States, it's all around the globe. It's not every year that's warmer, some years are colder. This winter has been a bit colder than normal in some parts. But sure enough, if we look at across the globe, the temperatures are warming. In the land and in the ocean temperatures, glaciers are retreating, ocean temperatures are warming and the sea level is rising, and snow cover is retreating, particularly in the northern hemisphere. So there's less ice in the Arctic and less snow cover in spring particularly. So there's evidence for warming all around the globe.
Is there any place on the globe that's cooling?
Sure, there are a number of places that are cooling, and that doesn't mean that the globe on average is warming. But in Antarctica, there have been cooler temperatures for several years, particularly in the central part of Antarctica for the last 20 years or so. But that's associated primarily with changes in the atmospheric wind patterns, and that's due mainly to ozone depletion, which is a separate issue from global warming.
Oklahoma Senator Jim Inhofe had what now a famous quote in which he seemed to imply that global warming something of a scientific hoax. What was he referring to, and how is that being taken in the scientific community?
Well, there are, the basis of science is trying to address different observational data, different theories, different mechanisms that lead to whatever process we're looking at. For global warming, as I said before, the climate has warmed and cooled in the past. Senator Inhofe has said that what we're seeing now is just part of a natural climate variation. And I would disagree that there is ample evidence that what we're seeing now is outside the range of natural climate variability, and that we can look at the causes. Senator Inhofe is really saying that we should be skeptical, and I completely agree. Scientists need to be skeptical and need to look at different alternative explanations before we come to essentially a consensus understanding. And we have reached that consensus understanding. That doesn't mean that everyone agrees for the mechanisms of global warming, but the vast majority of climate scientists do agree that the globe is warming and we do understand the causes.
Has it been warming for a long period of time, or is this some sort of short-term phenomenon?
Depends what you mean by a long period of time. If we're talking about geological records, the climate has been warming only for a relatively short period. And the warming coincides. The warming started around 1850. But the most dramatic warming was in two periods, from 1900 to 1940, and again from 1960 to the present. And the global temperatures have increased by about 1 degree Fahrenheit, a bit more than 1 degree Fahrenheit over the last 100 years. And that doesn't sound like very much, but that is in fact much warmer, much more warming than we've experienced over the last 1,000 years. So that warming is very large relative to any changes that we've had in the last 1,000 years.
If the Earth warmed 1 degree, how would that affect the level of the oceans?
If the oceans warm, then the sea level rises. And again, it's not by very much, but if anything warms, it expands. And the major contribution to the sea level rise that we've seen over the last 100 years has in fact been just the upper layers of the ocean warming up. In addition, glaciers melt, and the melting ice contributes to sea level rise, but that's in fact a smaller contribution than the warming of the upper layers of the ocean.
Those that are skeptical about global warming in general sometimes point to the fact that it seems like there's more money for science if you're studying global warming, and the theory is that if you don't come to the conclusion that the Earth is warming, that money won't be there for you for research. Is there anything to that, and how would you respond?
Well, there is certainly money for research in climate science, but the conclusions of that research aren't necessarily going to be decided when you put in the proposal. In fact, there is plenty of money to try to disprove that the climate is warming. But yes, there are major research programs because all the scientific evidence is pointing in one direction, that the climate is warming, and the funding is going to look at the causes for that warming and what might happen in the future. There is also significant funding from the fossil fuel industry to try to get improved understanding for alternative explanations. And that is really providing, if you like, the umpire to make sure that the scientists are not trying to pull the wool over our eyes. And there is plenty of support for studies to show that really the understanding of the mechanisms.
Let me ask a very basic question that maybe some people at home are asking. Okay, maybe the Earth is warming. Why should we care?
Well, maybe before we go into that, and what we should really look at is why is the Earth warming, not is it warming, and what's going to happen in the future. So the Earth is really warming because industrial activity has put more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. That's the main cause. And the greenhouse gases are mainly carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And they're due to human activity, burning fossil fuels like gas in your car, oil and coal and natural gas, and they've been growing in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. And the concentrations now are higher than at any time over the last 650,000 years. So we can get observations of these greenhouse gases from ice cores. We can see how they varied between ice ages, when they were lower, and warm periods over the last 650,000 years. They've never exceeded, for carbon dioxide, 300 parts per million over the last 650,000 years, and we're now at 380 parts per million. So we're about 30% higher than at any time over the last 600,000 years.
If burning fossil fuels is harming the atmosphere and perhaps contributing to global warming, is burning some synthetic fuels or the biodiesel fuels, how do they affect global warming, if at all?
Carbon dioxide is produced by burning biodiesel or E85, the ethanol, but the difference is that those are produced from essentially natural products like plants or soybeans or corn, and when the corn or the soybeans are growing, they take out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They extract the carbon dioxide, convert it into plant material. So those are called renewable fuels because they take out carbon dioxide when they're growing and put it back in, but there's no net change in carbon dioxide when you burn biodiesel, apart from the fact that you actually need some energy to grow the biofuels, and that energy is often from fossil fuels.
Dr. David Karoly is our guest here on The Verdict. We're discussing global warming, and we have another segment to come, so stay with us. It's an issue that's very much on the front burner of American society, and we'll have some graphs and charts and let David talk us through some of the global warming ideas and concepts that are presented here with us today. You're watching The Verdict. We'll be right back.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Shining is taking responsibility. At Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma, we know managing your health care can be overwhelming, and it's our job to help you meet the challenge. By guiding, supporting, and showing the way, we encourage you to gain control. Because we believe the best tool we can give you is the confidence to take charge. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Oklahoma, shining through.
Okiwani is an Indian name for a place where children play. When we obtained the camp, we found a lot of oil debris left in the woods. We saw a commercial about how the oil and natural gas industry cleans up old oil well sites. We called the OERB, and they agreed to remove tons of concrete and steel. It didn't cost us a thing. Thousands of children have left their footprints on this land. Thanks to the oil and gas industry, they will for a long time to come.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Oh, hi. I know you guys said I'd save with Cox Digital Telephone. Well, my bill came and... Could this be right?
You may be surprised how much you save with Cox Digital Telephone. That's why over 1.5 million people have switched.
So this really is a total? Lovely. because I think I found a good use for the savings.
With Cox, there's no waiting for the other shoe to drop. The only surprise is there's no surprise at all.
Not sure where you're headed? NATS can help you find your way. It's the National Athletic Testing System. We call it NATS. You'll call it your launching pad to success. NATS will give you a standardized evaluation that will help you measure your performance and give that information to college coaches so they can accurately evaluate your potential. NATS also helps with academic support. Join with the Oklahoma High School Football Coaches Association and head for success at www.nats.us.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Dr. David Karoly. David is a professor of meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. And today's subject matter is global warming. David, we have a graphic here that we'll just put on the screen immediately. And at the top of this graphic is going to be a chart that shows global average temperature. And this graphic seems to indicate that the Earth average temperature is indeed increasing.
That's right. This graphic is based on temperature observations from weather stations, from ships that collect data, and it shows right on the left-hand side is the year 1850, and it shows annually average temperatures. Those are the little circles, and then it shows the smooth curve, which is really an average over about 10 years. The blue bar shows essentially the uncertainty range, and what we see is the uncertainties are higher because there's less coverage in the early part of the record, and then we see a pronounced warming from 1900 to 1940, a drop from 1940 to 1950, and then again a pronounced warming from about 1960 onwards of about 6/7 of a degree Celsius, or about 1.25 degrees Fahrenheit. And remember, this graph is in degrees Celsius, not the degrees Fahrenheit that we normally look at in our weather forecasts.
Okay, and the middle graphic is global average sea level. What are we looking at here?
Here we're looking at estimates from all around the globe of the level of the ocean. And of course, waves and tides affect the ocean, but this is again long-term averages from all around the globe of the sea level, and it's been rising. And the units in this graph are in millimeters. And remember, it's 25 millimeters to an inch. And so the rise has been about 1 foot over the last 100 years. And this sea level rise is showing that the ocean temperatures are warming and also the glaciers are melting.
And the bottom one is Northern Hemisphere snow cover.
That's right. And so this is a record showing what's the aerial extent of snow cover in the Northern Hemisphere. And the record here is rather shorter. We don't have good evidence for snow cover in the 1850s to 1940s period. Most of this is taken from people reporting where the snow cover is. And we see that the snow cover has decreased in the Northern Hemisphere, exactly what you'd expect from a warmer climate.
Okay. I want to go back and talk about one thing you said, that the global average sea level about a foot over 100 years.
That's correct.
Foot's a long ways, especially when you consider all the water that's on the globe, but that sounds like that's something we could manage. That sounds like something we could deal with. Am I wrong, or should I be more concerned?
No, you're right that for many countries, managing a foot is within the range of things that we can cope with. But if the climate continues to warm, then the sea level will also continue to rise. And the projections for the next 100 years are between 1 foot and 2 foot of sea level rise, in addition to the 1 foot we've had over the last 150 years.
What part of the world would be most affected by a rise in sea level of a foot or to 3 feet?
Sure. The parts are obviously the low-lying areas. And so the low-lying areas include countries like Bangladesh and parts of India, but we also saw that even the coastline of the United States is very much affected by storm surges and sea level rise. And so some of the effects of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans were made worse because the sea level is rising and the land around New Orleans is sinking. So any of the low-lying parts of the coastline that are affected by storm surges will be affected by sea level rise.
State of Florida is pretty much close to sea level. How would they be affected by a rise in, say, 3 feet? Would that drastically change the amount of land that's covered by sea?
It's not, 3 feet of sea level rise is not going to drastically affect the amount of land that's going to be inundated all the time. But
so
a rise
you should still buy oceanfront property, is that what you're telling us?
Well, if you can afford oceanfront property in Florida, I can't afford oceanfront property in Florida. But you should be aware that storm surges associated with hurricanes or tropical storms are going to have more and more effect with sea level rise. So it's not the mean sea level that's most important, it's the sea level rise in addition to the storm surges that you get with tropical storms and hurricanes. And that's going to affect Florida, it's going to affect Texas coastline, Mississippi and Louisiana coastline. It's also going to affect the coastline in the Carolinas and places like that. So it's not the mean sea level all the time. It's when you get a storm surge in addition to that sea level rise.
It's been generally explained to me that one of the reasons that Oklahoma seems to have more tornadoes than it shares is because of our location. Relationship to the Gulf of Mexico, relationship to the Rocky Mountains, certain amount of wind patterns. But I would also assume that if there are some global temperature shifts, if it gets a little warmer or a little cooler, that perhaps the tornado alley could shift north or south. Am I wrong to assume that, or am I on something?
You're exactly right. The only problem is we don't really know all the factors that affect tornadoes. But certainly we do see year-to-year variations. The last few years have actually been relatively quiet in terms of tornadoes in Oklahoma. 2003 was an active year, but since then the tornadoes seem to have been further to the north and maybe further to the east. In the Dakotas, in Illinois, Kentucky, they've had bad tornado seasons for the last couple of years. But Texas and Oklahoma haven't had really bad years. And that's primarily associated with a shift in the jet stream and changes in the moisture patterns. What we do know in terms of future projections of climate change is that the warmer conditions are really like a northward shift in the climate zones. And the jet stream that affects the tornado alley is projected to move just a little bit further to the north. And that is likely to mean that the main regions with tornadoes are likely to be just a little bit further north, more in Kansas than in Oklahoma, and maybe a little bit even further north than that.
Okay, we have another graphic to show you. What are we looking at in this graphic? It says multi-model averages and assessed ranges for surface warning. Break that down for me.
Sure. Well, the left-hand side repeats what we saw in the previous graphic, the warming that we've seen over the last 100 years from 1900 to 2000. And then what we see are a range of climate model projections from 2000 to 2100. And the lowest graph, which seems to show no warming or very little warming at all, is in fact showing about another 0.3 of a degree warming. And that's if we could have absolutely no more emissions of greenhouse gases. We could stop the concentrations and make them exactly the same as they are at present. And still we get about 0.3 of a degree Celsius warming. And the next series of graphs are projections for a range of different, if you like, futures. They're called scenarios, and they make different projections of what might happen to industrial activity, to population, to energy use around the world. And what they show is a range of different warmings for the future. And the lowest one, the one that's labeled B1, shows a warming of between about 1 and 3 degrees Celsius. So that's about 1.5 to 4 degrees warming.
We're running out of time, David. Sum it up for us. If you were the one who could enact policy for the United States, how would we change? What agricultural changes, what energy changes would you like to see America take in the next few years to avoid some of the calamity that we've explained in this show?
Well, I'm not a policymaker, so I'm not going to talk about what I would want, but really the policy options. The climate is warming and will warm more in the future. And to reduce that, we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But how much, and the options for reducing greenhouse gas emissions include increasing energy efficiency, reducing fuel consumption in cars, and reducing fuel consumption or energy consumption in a range of industrial activities. And in fact, if most businesses improve their energy efficiency, they actually save money. So there are some money saving options as well. But the major ways to reduce carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere include capturing the carbon dioxide and storing it away when it's produced in power plants. And that carbon capture and storage technology is a great opportunity for Oklahoma.
Dr. David Karoly, thanks very much for coming on the show. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. I know I asked a wide range of questions. Thanks for fielding them all so brilliantly. Dr. David Karoly is a professor of meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. I'll have a final word when we return.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa. where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
State championships are on the line, and the road to the finals runs right through the Built Ford Tough Tournament Connection.
These 13, 14 men I had in the locker room left everything out on the line tonight.
That's right. It doesn't get any bigger than this. 3 nights a week, 3 weeks in a row. Highlights, scores, interviews.
We just need to keep on using our core vision and being a team, and to have help with Coach Dukes, and we'll make it through.
The Built Ford Tough Tournament Connection returns to the Cox Channel in February. It's nothing but net.
There's a whole new world online, but it's not always safe for kids. What if someone you meet online sends a message that makes you feel uncomfortable? Tell a parent or teacher right now. It's the safe way for kids, right, gang?
Right. Be safe online. Thanks to Lauren Nelson and Cox, we're working to keep Oklahoma kids safer online. For your free guide, log on now. And if you feel your child has been placed in danger by someone online, notify law enforcement today.
Welcome back to The Verdict. I want to thank Dr. David Karoly, a professor of meteorology at the University of Oklahoma, for being our guest on today's show as we discuss global warming. Next week, we'll be discussing the Big 12 Conference Championships that are coming to the state of Oklahoma, and specifically to Oklahoma City. Tim Brassfield from the Oklahoma City All Sports Association will be our guest. Also want to remind you about our website, theverdict.tv. If you have an idea for a show, drop us a note. Tell us who you'd like to see and what topics you'd like to see discussed. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict.
The preceding program was produced by the Production Services Group at Cox Communications, exclusively for the Cox Channel.